The late afternoon sun hung low over the Whitfield farmhouse in Independence, Missouri, casting long shadows across the peeling porch where Lenora sat alone with her mending basket. Her needle moved in practiced rhythm through the torn hem of her youngest sister's dress. The third one this month. Wren was careless with beautiful things, probably because beautiful things came so easily to her. Through the open window, Lenora could hear her sister's laughter spilling from the parlor like champagne from a glass filled too full. Three voices tangled together in that particular pitch she had come to recognize over 24 years of living in their shadows. The pitch that meant someone was about to be humiliated. And lately that someone was always her. Odette's voice rose above the others, bright and sharp as a new blade. "Oh, this is absolutely wicked. Mother would simply die if she knew." "Mother doesn't have to know." That was Cecily, always the boldest of the three. "Besides, it's just a bit of fun. No harm in it." Lenora's needle paused. Her sister's fun usually meant harm for someone. She set down the mending and moved quietly to the window, staying just out of sight. The August heat pressed against her skin, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its evening song, oblivious to the cruelty brewing inside the house. "Read it again, Odette." Wren's voice chimed in, sweet as poisoned honey. Odette cleared her throat with dramatic flair. Three brothers seeking bride. Owners of Bear Creek Homestead in the Wind River Range, Wyoming territory, seeking woman of gentle nature, modest beauty, and strong character for marriage. Must be willing to relocate to remote mountain country. Serious inquiries only. She paused for effect, letting the words hang in the warm Missouri air. "Can you imagine?" Cecily snatched the newspaper from her sister's hands. "Father heard about the Bear Creek operation from his business associates. Three brothers named Callahan. They own over 5,000 acres, cattle, timber, everything. But they live up on a mountain half a day's ride from the nearest town. No woman in her right mind would agree to that." "Then why would three wealthy men need to advertise for a bride?" Wren asked. "Because they live like wild men on a mountaintop." Cecily laughed. "No civilization, no society, no culture whatsoever." Odette went quiet for a moment. That particular silence made Lenora's stomach turn cold. She knew that silence. It was the silence of a snake coiling before the strike. "What if," Odette said slowly, "we sent someone to them?" The quiet that followed pressed against the walls of the parlor like something alive. "You're not thinking what I think you're thinking," Wren whispered. "Oh, but I am." Odette's words dripped with malice, each one carefully chosen and perfectly aimed. "Dear, sweet, unfortunate Lenora, 24 years old and never been courted. Father's greatest disappointment. The daughter who inherited mother's mousy hair and father's unfortunate nose instead of any of the Whitfield beauty." "Odette, that's cruel even for you," Wren said. But she was giggling. The sound of that giggle, small and mean and familiar, cut deeper than any of Odette's words. "Is it cruel or is it genius?" Odette was warming to her theme, her voice gaining the momentum of a runaway carriage. "Think about it. This rancher wants modest beauty. Well, Lenora is certainly modest. He wants gentle nature. She's about as threatening as a church mouse. And strong character. She's put up with us for 24 years, hasn't she?" Cecily howled with laughter. "Oh, Lord, the look on their faces when she steps off that train. They ordered a bride and received a scarecrow. And there's three of them. Three mountain men staring at our little Lenora. We'd be doing everyone a favor, really." Odette continued, her voice taking on a mock serious tone. "Lenora gets out of father's house. You know he's desperate to marry her off to anyone. And these mountain men get exactly what they deserve for being too uncivilized to court a woman properly." "How would we even do it?" Wren asked, and Lenora heard the shift in her voice from mockery to genuine conspiracy. "Simple. We fill out the response form in her name. Father has that daguerreotype of her from last year. The one where she's squinting because the sun was in her eyes. Makes her look even worse than usual. We send it with a lovely letter about how she's eager to begin a new life out west. And when Father finds out—" "Father won't find out until it's done," Odette said firmly. "By the time these mountain men respond, if they even do, it'll be too late to back out without embarrassing the family. You know how Father is about appearances. He'll force her to go through with it just to save face." "It's absolutely wicked," Wren breathed. It's absolutely perfect, Odette corrected. Now help me compose this letter. It needs to sound sincere. Dear Mr. Callahan, I am writing in response to your advertisement. Lenora backed away from the window. Her heart hammered so hard against her ribs she thought the sound of it might carry through the walls and betray her. She pressed her back against the rough clapboard siding and closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. She should storm in there. She should confront him. Tear up whatever letter they were composing, march straight to her father's study, and expose their scheme. That was what a sensible person would do. But Lenora did not do any of those things. Because underneath the hurt and the humiliation, underneath the familiar burn of being the family joke, a tiny seed of something else was sprouting. Something that felt dangerous and reckless and entirely unlike the quiet, invisible girl she had always been. 3 men, not one, 3, on a mountain, far away from everything. Far from this house where she would always be the plainest daughter. Far from mirrors that showed her all the ways she failed to measure up. Far from dances she was never asked to, and suitors who looked right through her on their way to court her sisters. What if this cruel joke became her only chance at escape? The thought was barely formed before she tried to crush it. But it would not be crushed. It sat in her chest like a coal, small and glowing and impossible to ignore. Lenora picked up her mending again. Her hands were shaking. 6 weeks later, the letter arrived. Lenora was collecting eggs from the hen house, her apron already spotted with yolk from a cracked shell, when she heard Odette's shriek of laughter carry across the yard. That particular quality of laughter, the kind that came at someone else's expense. By the time she reached the house, all 3 sisters were crowded around the dining room table, passing a thick envelope between them. Their father, Amos Whitfield, stood nearby with his thumbs hooked in his vest pockets and his expression carefully blank. "Father, you have to see this," Cecily gasped between giggles. "Our little joke actually worked." Amos Whitfield's eyes found Lenora standing in the doorway, and something flickered across his weathered face. Calculation, perhaps. The look of a man who saw an opportunity to solve a problem that had nagged him for years. "Lenora, come here." She approached slowly, still clutching her basket of eggs, feeling every eye in the room like the point of a needle. Odette thrust the letter at her with a grin that was equal parts triumph and disbelief. "Your mountain men have accepted your proposal. They sent train fare and everything." The envelope was thick, the paper quality better than anything the Whitfield household used. Inside, Lenora found pages covered in 3 distinctly different hands, and her breath caught. The first section was written in a bold, neat script that wasted no words. "Dear Miss Whitfield, I received your letter and photograph with interest. I am Cordell Callahan, eldest of 3 brothers. I am 37 years old, a widower with a 4-year-old son named Tate. I will not mislead you about the nature of this arrangement. I am not a romantic man, and I do not make promises about love or passion. What I can offer is security, respect, and a comfortable life. Wyoming is hard country and mountain life is demanding. But for a woman of strong constitution, it can be rewarding. The choice is yours entirely. Respectfully, Cordell Callahan." Below that, in a softer, slightly slanted hand, another voice spoke. "Miss Whitfield, my name is Slade, the youngest brother. I want you to know that Bear Creek is the most beautiful place I have ever seen. The aspens turn gold in autumn, and the elk come through the valley at dawn. We are not polished men or eloquent speakers, but we are honest, and at Bear Creek, honesty is worth more than beauty." The third brother, Wyatt, had not written a single word. At the bottom of the letter, Cordell had added a brief note. "My second brother, Boone, sends his regards." Lenora would learn later that this was a lie. Boone had sent nothing at all. Beneath the letter was a bank draft for an amount that made the room go quiet. This was not the act of desperate men scraping together pennies. This was serious. This was real. "The 15th, Cecily leaned over Lenora's shoulder. "That's less than 2 weeks away." "Well, Lenora," Amos Whitfield's voice had gone hard the way it always did when he was making calculations that involved his daughter's futures. "What do you have to say for yourself? When did you begin this correspondence behind my back?" Lenora looked up from the letter. Her eyes moved from her father's stern face to her sister's gleeful expressions. They wanted her to confess, to stammer, to crumble. They wanted her to refuse and become the laughingstock who could not hold on to a husband she had never met. But as she stood there holding the straightforward words of a stranger who offered honesty instead of romance, something crystallized inside her like ice forming on still water. Clear, hard, unbreakable. "I'll go," she said quietly. The room erupted. "You'll what?" Odette's face went white as milk. "Lenora, don't be absurd," Cicely sputtered. "There are three of them, on a mountain, lone with three strange men. You cannot possibly be serious." Wren began to cry. Lenora looked at each of her sisters in turn. "You didn't think they'd actually respond. You didn't think I'd actually go." She turned to her father. "This gentleman and his brothers have made an honorable proposal. If you'll permit it, Father, I'll accept." Amos Whitfield studied his youngest daughter for a long moment. Whatever he saw in her face, desperation or determination or some dangerous mixture of both, seemed to satisfy whatever calculation he had been running. "Very well. The men appear to be of good standing. I'll make the arrangements." "But Father," Odette started. "Enough." His voice cut through her protest like an axe through soft wood. "Your sister has received an offer of marriage from respectable men. That is more than I dared hope for at her age. We will see her properly prepared and send it off." After their father left the room, Lenora felt three sets of eyes boring into her back. She turned to face them one final time. "Thank you," she said. "Truly, you've given me something I could never have managed on my own. A way out." She left them standing in stunned silence and climbed the stairs to her small bedroom under the eaves. Only when the door was safely closed did she allow herself to unfold the letter again with shaking hands. "The choice is yours entirely." Was it, though, she was choosing between humiliation here and the unknown there, between slow suffocation and a leap into darkness, between being invisible forever and gambling everything on three strangers who lived on a mountaintop in Wyoming? Some choice, but it was more than she had ever been given before, and she would take it with both hands. The night before her departure, her mother found her. Dorothea Whitfield appeared in the doorway of Lenora's small room while she was folding clothes into her grandmother's old trunk. The evening light caught her mother's face and revealed something Lenora had never seen there before, something that looked like grief. "May I come in?" Lenora nodded, not trusting her voice. Her mother sat on the edge of the narrow bed and smoothed her skirts in a nervous gesture that Lenora had inherited. Those same restless hands, the same inability to sit still when emotions ran too close to the surface. "I know what your sisters did." Dorothea's voice was barely above a whisper. "Odette has a conscience, buried though it may be. She came to me last night in tears." Lenora's hands stilled on the calico dress she was folding. "You don't have to do this. We can send word that you've taken ill. We can—" "No." The word came out harder than Lenora intended. She softened her voice, but not her resolved simram. "Mother, when has anyone in this family ever truly seen me, really looked at me, and seen who I am? You dress me in Cecily's cast-offs because why waste money on new dresses for the plain daughter? Father forgot my last birthday entirely. Odette introduced me to her suitor's business partner as just the spinster sister. I'm 24 years old and I'm already invisible." "That's not true. Isn't it?" Lenora pulled her hand away gently. "I've watched you, Mother, the way you look at me sometimes. I can see you wondering how you produce something so ordinary when your other daughters shine so bright." Dorothea's eyes filled with tears. "Lenora, I'm not angry about it anymore. It just is what it is. But these men, these Callahan brothers, they have no expectations of beauty. They're not comparing me to Odette or Cecily or anyone else. They just want someone who can work hard and keep a house and be honest with them. And is that really enough for you? A marriage without love?" Lenora thought about the dances she had never been asked to, the suitors who had looked right through her, the future she could see stretching ahead with painful clarity, growing old in this house, becoming more invisible with each passing year. "Maybe love is overrated," she said. "Maybe respect and honesty are better foundations. At least they're real." Dorothea looked at her daughter for a haunted time and something shifted behind her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or a kind of sorrowful understanding that came too late to change anything, but could still perhaps set something free. "You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." "I've had to be." Her mother stood, then surprised Lenora by pulling her into a fierce embrace, the kind of embrace that held years of unspoken apology in its tightness. "Then go. Go and be strong and write to me. Not your father, not your sisters. Me. Tell me the truth about how you are. I will, Lenora whispered. After Dorothea left, Lenora returned to her packing. At the bottom of her trunk, wrapped in one of her own carefully mended shawls, was a music box that had belonged to her grandmother. It was the only beautiful thing she owned, the only heirloom that had come to her instead of to one of her prettier sisters. She wound the key and listened to the delicate melody fill her small room. Tomorrow she would board a train heading west toward a territory she had only read about in newspapers, toward three men she knew only through one brutally honest letter and one conspicuous silence. The music box played on sweet and sad, and Lenora Whitfield let herself imagine just for a moment what it might feel like to be seen. The train carried her west for 3 days. She watched the landscape transform from the green familiarity of Missouri to the endless prairie of Kansas, then to the high plains where grass stretched to the horizon and the sky seemed impossibly vast. Like God had taken the roof off the world and left nothing between the earth and heaven but empty blue air. Other passengers came and went, a family with noisy children, a dignified elderly couple, a young drummer in a check suit who kept trying to catch her eye until she made it clear through perfect stillness that she was not available for conversation. At night, she lay in her narrow berth and listened to the rhythmic clatter of the wheels. Each mile of track was a mile further from who she had been. Each hour carried her closer to who she might become. She wrote in her mother's journal by lamplight, September 12th, 1874, somewhere in Kansas. I wonder what they look like. The letter said Cordell is 37, a widower. The second brother, Boone, did not write at all. What kind of man refuses to acknowledge his future sister through marriage? The third slate wrote about aspens and elk and beauty. Three brothers, three strangers, three chances to be disappointed or three chances to begin again. I wonder which it will be. She turned the pen in her fingers, watching lamplight play along its surface. Cordell wrote that he is not a romantic man. I have been trying to decide if that frightens me or relieves me. Romance in novels always seem like a trap. All those breathless feelings and desperate passions that make sensible people act like fools. Maybe it is better to build something steady instead of something that burns bright and burns out. Or maybe I am just telling myself this because I have never had the chance to be romanced and I am trying not to mind. The train pulled into Cheyenne on a bright September morning that felt like stepping into a different world. The air was thinner here, sharper, carrying scents Lenora had no names for. Sage and dust and something wild that made her pulse quicken. The town sprawled in a jumble of false-fronted buildings and wide dirt streets, nothing like the ordered civilization of Missouri. Cowboys and dusty chaps lounged outside saloons. A woman in a split riding skirt strode past with a rifle slung over her shoulder, and nobody gave her a second glance. Back home, such a sight would have caused a scandal. Here it was simply Tuesday. Lenora stood outside a telegraph office and stared at the door. She could still send word, could still say she had changed her mind. Her father would be disappointed but unsurprised. Her sisters would laugh themselves sick. A weathered man in a cattleman's coat pushed past her into the office muttering about beef prices. Through the open door, she caught a glimpse of the telegraph operator fingers flying over the keys, sending messages racing along copper wires to distant destinations. She thought of Cordell Callahan's letter, that brutal honesty. I am not a romantic man. The door swung shut. Lenora turned away without entering. 4 more hours on a smaller train rattling north through a canyon where red rock walls towered overhead, then emerging onto rolling grassland that seemed to stretch to the edge of forever. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The air grew colder, cleaner, sharp enough to taste. Red Mesa Station appeared ahead, barely more than a platform in a small building with the town's name painted on the side in fading letters. The train hissed to a stop. The conductor helped her down, unloading her trunk with casual efficiency. Someone meeting you, miss. Yes, Lenora managed. I believe so. Well, good luck to you then. He tipped his cap and climbed back aboard. Within minutes, the train was pulling away, trailing smoke and noise, leaving her standing alone on the wooden platform, with her trunk and carpet bag, the wind tugging at her skirts. The platform was empty except for a rangy yellow dog sleeping in a patch of late afternoon sun. Lenora's heart sank into her boots. Had she gotten the date wrong? Had they changed their minds? Had three men on a mountain looked at her squinting photograph and decided that even loneliness was preferable to what they saw? Then she heard footsteps on the wooden planks. Not one set, several. Heavy. The kind of footsteps that belonged to large men who were accustomed to making the ground know they were there. Lenora turned. Three figures emerged from the shadow of the station house, and the breath went out of her body like she had been struck. The first man was tall, not merely tall in the way that men in Missouri were sometimes tall, but tall in a way that seemed to alter the proportions of the world around him. 6 feet and 6 inches of lean, weathered strength with broad shoulders that blocked the light behind him. His face was all hard angles and sun-darkened skin, deep lines carved around eyes the color of good whiskey. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, a plain shirt, a leather vest, and he carried his hat in his hands as he approached. His eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she did not look away. She had promised herself she would not start this new life as a coward. The second man stood directly behind the first. Bigger still. Taller by an inch, broader through the chest and shoulders, with a face that was harder, more angular, as if the same sculptor had carved both brothers, but used a heavier hand on this one. A scar ran from his left shoulder down and disappeared beneath an open leather vest. A thick rope of white tissue that spoke of terrible violence survived. His eyes were the same whiskey amber as his brother's, but darker, colder, full of something that looked like banked fury. His arms were folded across his massive chest, and everything in his posture said the same thing. I do not want to be here. The third man stepped out last. The smallest of the three, which still made him well over 6 feet tall with a leaner build and features that were softer, almost gentle compared to his brother's. He had the same dark hair, but is curled slightly at his collar. The same amber eyes, but warmer, touched with something that might have been humor or kindness. He was the only one who smiled. It was a small smile, barely a curve at one corner of his mouth, but it was there. Lenora stood before them, 5 feet and 3 inches of rumpled traveling dress in wind-blown honey-colored hair and road dust. Her carpet bag clutched before her chest like a shield. She could feel how small she was in comparison, how absurdly, almost comically small. A sparrow standing before three hawks. The silence stretched between them, heavy with evaluation and uncertainty, and the enormous weight of what they were all about to do. The first man broke it. Miss Whitfield. His voice was deep, the kind of voice that did not waste words or raise itself unnecessarily. It simply stated things and expected them to be heard. Yes. Cordell Callahan. He did not offer his hand. This is Boone, a nod toward the mountain of scar and muscle behind him. And Slade. Slade stepped forward. Welcome to Wyoming, Miss Whitfield. How was your journey? Before Lenora could answer, Boone spoke. His voice was lower than Cordell's, rougher like gravel sliding over iron. She's smaller than I expected. He looked her over from her dusty boots to her wind-tangled hair, making no effort to hide his assessment. A lot smaller. Are you sure you didn't get on the wrong train? Boone, Cordell's voice cut like a blade. What? Someone has to say it. Boone turned to his older brother, and there was challenge in every line of his massive frame. Look at her. She won't survive one winter at Bear Creek. The wind will blow her right off the mountainside. We discussed this. No, you and Slade discussed it. I made it clear I wanted no part of this. Boone looked directly at Lenora, his amber eyes hard as polished stone. You should go back where you came from. We don't need more trouble. The words landed between them like a thrown gauntlet. The yellow dog raised its head, ears pricked, sensing the tension even from 20 feet away. Slade spoke quietly. Boone, that's enough. But Boone had already turned away. He walked toward the wagon in long, angry strides, each bootfall heavy on the wooden platform, and swung himself up onto a waiting horse with the ease of a man who had been riding before he could walk. He did not look back. Silence again. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and something Lenora could not name. Something clean and vast and terrifying. Cordell looked at her. She could see him evaluating, measuring running calculations behind those whiskey-colored eyes, deciding whether she was worth the trouble his brother had just promised. Lenora lifted her chin. It was instinct, the automatic response of a woman who had spent her entire life being found wanting and had learned to face the finding without flinching. I don't blow away easily, Mr. Callahan. Something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, or the faintest shadow of respect. Wagons this way, 3 hours to the ranch. We should move before dark. He picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing at all and started walking. Slade took the carpet bag from her hands before she could protest. Let me carry that. His smile widened just slightly. Don't mind Boone. He bites, but it's not always fatal. It felt fairly fatal, Lenora said. Slade laughed. The sound was warm and genuine and entirely unexpected after the cold wall of his brother's hostility. All right, it might sting, but it won't kill you. Nothing on this mountain will if you're tough enough to outlast it. The wagon was plain but well-maintained, pulled by two sturdy horses who nickered softly as Cordell loaded her trunk. He offered his hand to help her up to the seat, and Lenora took it. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but careful. She could feel the controlled strength in his fingers, the way he measured his own force to avoid hurting her. He climbed up beside her. Slade mounted a horse and rode alongside. Ahead, Boone was already a distant figure on horseback, his broad back turned toward them like a door slammed shut. The wagon lurched forward. Red Mesa Station began to recede behind them, and with it, the last outpost of anything resembling the world Lenora had known. The road climbed. Prairie gave way to rolling hills, then hills gave way to pine forest that thickened with every mile. The air grew cooler sharp with resin and snowmelt. The road narrowed until it was little more than a rutted track winding between massive trees. The wagon rocked and swayed, and Lenora gripped the seat with both hands. Conversation came in short, practical bursts. Cordell answered her questions the way he seemed to do everything, with economy and precision. How large is the ranch? 5,000 acres deeded, another 3,000 in grazing leases, around 800 head of cattle, timber operation on the north slope. 3 of you manage all of that. 3 brothers plus Judson. He's our full-time hand. We hire on extra help during roundup and drives. Slade filled in the details Cordell left out. The way the aspens on the mountainside blazed like fire in autumn before dropping their leaves in a single week of wind. The elk herds that sometimes passed through the valley at dawn moving like brown rivers through the morning mist. The sound of Bear Creek running almost year-long clean water from the snowpack above. Cordell interrupted. Wyoming is hard country, beautiful but hard. Winters are brutal. Summers can bring the drought. The work never stops. It sounded like a warning. Lenora nodded. I'm not afraid of hard work. I read that in your letter. There was something in his tone she could not quite identify. Not mockery exactly, but not quite belief either. Then he added almost casually, though the letter was too flowery, didn't quite match what I saw in the photograph. Lenora felt heat rise up her neck. What do you mean? Cordell kept his eyes on the road. Most people lie with their eyes, put on whatever face they think the world wants to see. But your eyes in that photograph, they look tired and tone and real, like someone who'd stopped pretending. He paused. The words in the letter said one thing. Your eyes said another. I chose to believe the eyes. Lenora's breath caught. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her and seen past the plain surface to anything underneath. He continued the same flat, practical tone. You'll marry me if you're agreeable. That's the arrangement. You'll manage the house, look after my son Tate. I'll provide for you, protect you, treat you with respect. All 3 of us live in the same house. Boone and Slade will be there. You need to know that. I understand. Boone won't be easy. He has his reasons. Cordell paused for a long time. Reasons connected to things I'm not ready to explain right now. The words hung in the mountain air, creating a mystery that settled into Lenora's mind like a splinter. What had happened? What had made Boone Callahan into a wall of fury and scar tissue? And what did it have to do with her being here? When the sun was nearly gone, they crested a final rise and Cordell pulled the horses to a stop. There, he said. Lenora looked where he pointed and felt the world tilt beneath her. Bear Creek homestead spread across the valley below, like something from a painting. The main house was larger than she had imagined, a sprawling structure of logs and stone with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides nestled against a mountainside thick with pine. Outbuildings clustered nearby. Barns, stable corrals, various sheds all maintained with obvious care. Beyond them, cattle dotted the grassland like dark punctuation marks on a golden page. Bear Creek itself caught the last of the twilight glinting silver as it wound through the valley floor. Lamplight glowed in the house windows. Smoke rose thin and straight from the chimney into the still evening air. "It's bigger than I thought," Lenora said softly. 5,000 acres of deeded land. Another 3,000 in grazing leases. About 800 head, though that'll grow after spring calving. My father started this place with nothing but a land grant and determination. I've spent 15 years building it into something that'll last." The quiet pride in his voice was the most emotion she had heard from him since they met. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Beautiful and lonely," Cordell replied. "Nearest neighbor is 10 miles. Town is half a day's ride. Winter can cut us off for weeks at a time." Slade from horseback beside them spoke quietly. "But when spring comes, there's no place on earth more beautiful." The wagon started down the slope. A dog began barking as they approached, and a small figure appeared on the porch silhouetted against the lamplight, spilling from the open door. Tate Callahan was 4 years old. He had dark curls like his father and bright blue eyes that must have come from his mother. A scattering of freckles across his nose. A gap where he had lost a front tooth. He stood in his night clothes with Mrs. Weaver, the housekeeper, a silver-haired woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and an expression that gave nothing away, holding his shoulder. "Papa, is that the lady from the letter?" Cordell lifted Lenora down from the wagon. His hands were so large, they nearly encircled her waist entirely. "Yes, this is Miss Lenora." Mrs. Weaver looked Lenora up and down with the cool assessment of a woman who had survived enough winters to know what mattered and what did not. "Small little thing, aren't you? At least you won't eat much." But her eyes were warmer than her words. Cordell led Lenora inside. The interior was dim lit by oil lamps, but the impression was of solidity. Heavy furniture, clean floors, no clutter. This was a man's space, practical and spare, empty of anything soft or decorative. A house that had forgotten what beauty looked like, or perhaps had stopped caring. Her room was at the end of the ground floor hall, small, a narrow bed with a thick quilt, a dresser, a washstand, a single wooden chair, a window that looked out toward what she thought might be the barn, though it was too dark to tell. It was Hannah's sewing room, Cordell said, and for the first time she heard something like apology in his voice. "I had it converted. It's small, but it's yours. I'm upstairs with Tate. Boone and Slade are upstairs as well. Alone, ground floor, 3 men and a child above." Lenora understood the arrangement. Distance, propriety, protection of her honor before the wedding. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." "Cordell, if we're getting married tomorrow, you should call me Cordell." "Tomorrow?" "Pastor Aldrich is riding out at first light. I figured there was no point in waiting." He studied her face. "Unless you need time, I can send word to postpone if—" "No." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Tomorrow is fine." What difference would waiting make? She had already traveled halfway across the country. Another day would not change the nature of what they were doing. He nodded and turned to go, then stopped. From the hallway came the sound of heavy boots on stairs, and Boone appeared at the end of the corridor. He had not changed from the clothes he wore at the station. The open vest, the scarred chest visible beneath the folded arms, the jaw set like granite. He looked at Lenora, then at Cordell, and the air between the two brothers became something almost physical. A pressure, a weight. "You're really going to do this?" Not a question. "Yes." Boone stepped closer. He was enormous in the narrow hallway, his shoulders nearly touching both walls. "You're bringing a strange woman into this house, into Hannah's house, into Hannah's sewing room, and tomorrow you'll put Hannah's ring on her finger." "Hannah has been gone 5 years, Boone." "She's gone because—" Boone stopped himself abruptly. Something had been about to come out, something raw and dangerous, and he had caught it just in time. His eyes flickered to Lenora, who stood with her back against the wall, her blue eyes wide but dry, her small frame rigid but unbroken. Then back to Cordell. "You'll regret this," Boone said, low, almost a whisper, but each word carried the weight of a hammer blow. He turned and climbed the stairs, each step like thunder. The door to his room closed so hard the oil lamps flickered in their brackets and the house seemed to shudder around them. Silence settled over the hallway like dust after an explosion. Slade appeared from the kitchen doorway. He had clearly heard everything, but had stayed out of the way with the instinct of a youngest sibling who knew when to let the older ones fight. "I'm sorry about Boone," he said to Lenora. "He carries things, heavy things, and he doesn't know how to set them down." "He's afraid it will happen again," Lenora said quietly. "Whatever happened before, with Hannah, he's afraid of a repeat." Both Cordell and Slade went still. The silence lasted too long to be casual, too long to be anything other than confirmation. "We all carry wounds," Slade finally had said, "in different ways." Cordell drew a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep and painful. "Get some rest, Lenora. Tomorrow will be long." He went upstairs. The sound of his door closing was quiet, controlled. Nothing like Boone's explosive exit, but somehow just as final. Slade lingered. "Do you need anything?" "I'm fine, Horace." But her voice trembled at the edges. He nodded. "You're brave. Braver than you know." And then he too was gone. Lenora closed her door, sat on the edge of the narrow bed, and for the first time since boarding the train allowed her hands to tremble without trying to stop them. She opened the music box. The tinkling melody filled the small room, delicate and impossibly sweet against the rough log walls. A soft knock interrupted the music. "Lenora, I have supper." She opened the door. Cordell held a tray laden with stew, fresh bread, and black coffee. The aroma hit her empty stomach like a fist. He set the tray on the dresser, and his eyes found the music box. Something unreadable crossed his face. Pain, perhaps, or memory. "I heard music." "My grandmother's music box." He looked at the small wooden box for a long moment. "Hannah used to play piano. Not well, but she enjoyed it. I haven't heard music in this house in 5 years." He paused at the door, his broad frame filling the space between the log walls. It was good hearing it again. He left before she could respond. Lenora ate slowly, savoring the rich stew. Through the window came the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. Horses moving in the barn, the distant lowing of cattle, the wind in the pines, and somewhere upstairs the sound of a man pacing back and forth. Boone, she guessed, not sleeping, trapped with his ghosts. Morning came too soon. The wedding was simple enough to be almost brutal. The parlor morning light slanting through windows, the smell of pine smoke and coffee. Tate sat on the sofa, swinging his legs, watching everything with the solemn gravity of a child who knows something important is happening, even if he does not understand what. Slade stood to one side as witness. His face was serious, but his eyes were warm. Boone stood in the doorway, not inside the room, not gone from the house. Just there on the threshold, arms folded back against the frame. He would not participate, but he would not leave. The significance of that was not lost on Lenora. Pastor Aldrich, a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake, opened his Bible. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here." Lenora barely heard the words. She was too aware of Cordell beside her, tall and solid, his clean shirt smelling of soap, his jaw freshly shaved. The effort he had made, however small, told her this mattered to him. "Cordell Callahan, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Steady, sure." "Lenora Whitfield, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" This was it. After this, she would be bound to this stranger in the eyes of God and law. There would be no going back to Missouri, no returning to her small room under the eaves, to her sister's laughter, to her father's indifference, to a life of quiet erasure. "I do," she whispered. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Cordell, you may kiss your bride." Cordell hesitated. For one fractured second, uncertainty broke through his careful control, the first real crack Lenora had seen in his composure. Then he bent down slowly, giving her time to pull away. She did not pull away. His lips brushed hers, light as breath, over in a heartbeat. But in that brief contact, she felt the calluses on his hands where he had cupped her shoulders, smelled leather and soap, sensed the leash strength in the way he held himself, so carefully gentle, as though he were afraid of breaking something fragile. Then he stepped back, and it was done. Tate jumped off the sofa and ran to them. "Are you my mama now?" Lenora looked down at this child who would never remember his real mother. This small boy with his dark curls and his blue eyes and his gap-toothed smile looking up at her with a hope so pure it cracked something open in her chest. "Yes," she said softly. "I suppose I am." good papa said you'd teach me to read. Did he now? She glanced at Cordell, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Tate has been asking, he said gruffly. I can teach him numbers and ranch work, but reading. I can teach you, Lenora told the boy. I used to help at Sunday school back home. From the doorway, Boone made a sound. It might have been a sigh. It might have been something else entirely. He turned and disappeared before Lenora could read his expression, but in the instant before he vanished, their eyes met. And what she saw in his was not hatred. It was something more complicated. Pain, perhaps. And beneath the pain, something that looked against all odds, like the faintest reluctant flicker of acknowledgement. Cordell pulled something from his vest pocket. A simple gold band. This was Hannah's. I want you to have it. Lenora stared at the ring. I can't. It was hers. It wouldn't be right. She's gone, Lenora, and you're my wife now. Hannah would have wanted it used, not sitting in a box collecting dust. His voice roughened with something that might have been old pain or new resolve. She held out her hand. Cordell slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, loose enough that she would need to be careful, but the weight of it felt like an anchor. A promise, a reminder that this was no longer a dream or a joke or a mistake. It was real. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded, already turning away. I need to get to work. Cattle don't care about weddings. Tate, you helped Mrs. Callahan today, you hear? Yes, Papa. And then he was gone. Boots heavy on the porch, his voice calling to Judson about checking fence lines, and the ordinary sounds of a working ranch swallowing up the extraordinary fact that Lenora Whitfield had just become Lenora Callahan. She stood in the parlor wearing a dead woman's ring in a house she did not know. Married to a man she had met yesterday, surrounded by a mountain wilderness she had only read about in newspapers. Tate tugged her hand. Want to see my room? Papa says I have to keep it clean now that you're here. I would love to see your room, Lenora said. She let the boy lead her into her new life. The first week passed like water over stones, smoothing some edges, revealing others, reshaping everything it touched. Lenora threw herself into her new role with the desperate determination of someone who knew that failure meant returning to everything she had escaped. She rose before dawn and had breakfast ready when the men came in from early chores. She cleaned and cooked and learned the rhythms of ranch life the way a musician learns a new instrument, one note at a time, feeling for the pattern beneath the noise. Tate became her constant shadow. He talked without stopping, a running commentary on everything from ants to clouds to the complex politics of the barn cat hierarchy. His energy should have been exhausting. Instead, it was the opposite. There was something healing about his uncomplicated acceptance. He did not care that she was plain. He did not compare her to anyone. He simply held her hand and showed her his world, and in the showing made her part of it. Each of the Callahan brothers inhabited her new life differently. Cordell was courteous and appreciative of her efforts, but emotionally he remained behind a wall so high and thick that Lenora could not even see the top of it. He slept upstairs. He rose before her. He worked until dark. He maintained careful, perfect distance. They were husband and wife on paper and strangers in practice, orbiting each other like planets that shared a sun but never touched. Slade was warmth itself. He was the first to compliment her cooking, the first to call her by name instead of Mrs. Callahan, the first to treat her like family rather than an employee. He showed her his woodworking shop behind the barn where he carved with a patience and skill that transformed rough timber into art. Horses for Tate, chess pieces for winter evenings, a small wooden box with a hinged lid that he was sanding smooth. What's it for? She asked. Things worth keeping, he said and smiled. Boone remained a fortress. He ate with the family but did not look at Lenora. He answered her questions in single syllables. He left his dirty plate on the table as though testing her, and she cleared it without comment, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. But there were cracks in his wall too, small ones. One morning she was struggling with a heavy water bucket, and he appeared from nowhere, took it from her hands, without a word, set it on the kitchen floor, and walked away. The action contradicted everything he said. Lenora noticed. 10 days after the wedding, she was putting Tate to bed when the boy asked the question she had been dreading. Did you know my first mama? Lenora's hands stilled on the quilt she was tucking around him. No, sweetheart. I never met her. Papa doesn't talk about her. Uncle Boone doesn't either. Uncle Slade sometimes tells me she liked to sing, but I can't remember her voice. His blue eyes, Hannah's eyes looked up at her from the pillow. Is that bad? No, Tate, you were very young. It's not bad at all. Do you think she would have liked me? The question broke something inside Lenora that she had not known was there. She loved you more than anything in the world, Tate. Your papa told me so. Will you stay here forever? Promise you won't go away. Forever, Lenora said. I promise. His small fingers found her hand and held on with the fierce, trusting grip that only a child can manage. I'm glad you came. Papa is less sad now. The observation delivered with a 4-year-old's devastating honesty hit Lenora like a stone. Was Cordell less sad? She could not tell. He seemed the same to her. Controlled, distant, unreachable. But perhaps Tate saw what she could not. Perhaps children could read the hearts of their fathers the way mapmakers read mountains, finding paths invisible to everyone else. Later that night, Lenora went downstairs for water. The house was dark except for moonlight through the windows, painting the log walls silver in shadow. She filled her glass at the kitchen pump and was turning to go back to her room when she heard voices from the front porch. Boone's voice, low and rough, was something that sounded like pain. She doesn't belong here. Nobody belongs here except us. And Slade, gentle but firm. You can't live like this forever, Boone. You can't blame her for what Hannah did. The silence that followed was so complete that Lenora could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Boone again, quieter now. She's like Hannah, small, fragile. She'll hate this place within 6 months. She is nothing like Hannah. Slade's voice held an edge Lenora had never heard from him before. Nothing, and you know it. Lenora retreated to her room without making a sound. She sat on her bed in the darkness and stared at the wall, the glass of water forgotten in her hand, Slade's words burning through her mind. You can't blame her for what Hannah did. Not what happened to Hannah. What Hannah did. The distinction was a door opening onto a room full of questions that Lenora was not yet ready to enter. But she filed it away in the part of her mind that had spent 24 years observing, cataloging, building a careful understanding of the people around her. Whatever had happened in this house, it was more than a woman dying in childbirth. It was more than grief. There was guilt here and anger and a secret that all three brothers carried differently. Cordell carried it in silence. Slade carried it in gentleness. And Boone carried it in fury. Lenora wound her grandmother's music box and listened to it play in the darkness of her small room, in the house on the mountain that was now her home, surrounded by men who were still more mystery than family. She opened her journal and wrote by moonlight. September 25th, 1874. Bear Creek Homestead. I have been married 10 days. My husband sleeps upstairs, 2 floors of timber and an ocean of silence between us. His middle brother wants me gone for reasons I do not yet understand. Reasons tangled up with a dead woman and a secret that nobody will speak. His youngest brother says I am brave. His son holds my hand and calls me mama and looks at me like I am something precious. She paused, the pen hovering over the page. And me, I am doing what I have always done. Mending, cooking, cleaning, making myself useful. But for the first time, instead of feeling invisible for it, I feel necessary. These 3 men need someone. This house needs someone. This child needs someone. Perhaps I am that someone. Or perhaps Boone is right. Perhaps the wind will blow me off the mountainside. But I do not think so. I have been blown around enough in this life. It is time to take root. The music box wound down to silence. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. Somewhere on the mountain, a wolf called out long and lonesome, and another answered from the darkness beyond the valley. Lenora Callahan closed her journal, extinguished the lamp, and lay down in her narrow bed to wait for morning and whatever it would bring. Part 2. The Storm and the Secret. October arrived at Bear Creek with a crispness in the air that warned of winter's approach. The aspens on the mountainside turned gold, then blazed like fire against the dark evergreens, then dropped their leaves in a single windswept week that left the branches bare and reaching toward the sky like old bones. Lenora watched the transformation from the kitchen window while kneading bread dough, marveling at how quickly the landscape could change. How one day the valley looked like it had been dipped in honey, and the next it looked like a skeleton stripped down to its hard, true shape. She had been at Bear Creek for 6 weeks now, and the rhythms of ranch life had begun to feel almost natural. She knew which hens were the best layers and which ones would peck your hand if you reached under them without speaking first. She knew that the bay mare copper would bite if you cinched her saddle too fast, and that the old gelding parson would follow you anywhere for a sugar lump. She could read the sky for coming weather the way Mrs. Weaver had taught her. Low clouds, northwest wind temperature dropping fast. That meant prepare. Bring the livestock close. Fill every container with water. Stack wood higher. Mrs. Weaver had been thorough in her education. The housekeeper came twice a week, and each visit was a master class in mountain survival delivered with the blunt efficiency of a woman who had buried two husbands and raised four sons in country that forgave nothing and forgot less. Mr. Cordell and his brothers eat big meals, Mrs. Weaver explained, as they stood in the well-stocked pantry. Breakfast at dawn, dinner at midday, supper at dusk. Ranch work burns energy. You must cook plenty. Always have coffee ready. Keep bread fresh. Wednesday is baking day. Thursday is laundry. Friday the men come to the main house for accounts and pay. What about Tate? Same as the men, just smaller portions. He is a good eater, no fussing. Mrs. Weaver paused, her sharp eyes softening for just a moment. He is a good boy. Lonely but good. The men try their best, but a child needs a mother. The weight of that statement settled on Lenora's shoulders like a yoke. This child needed a mother, and she was supposed to be it, despite having no idea what she was doing. But she learned, the way she had always learned, by watching, by listening, by doing the work until the work became part of her. The daily routine carved itself into her body. Up at 4:30, build the fire, start breakfast, eggs, bacon, pancakes, biscuits, black coffee strong enough to dissolve a horseshoe nail. 6 o'clock, the men ate in near silence, shoveling food with the focused intensity of people who burned every calorie twice over before noon. 7 o'clock, Tate's reading lesson at the kitchen table, his small finger tracing the shapes of letters, while Lenora guided his hand. Then the long middle hours of the day, washing, mending, preserving, cooking again, cleaning again. Always something that needed doing, always another task waiting behind the one she had just finished. It was harder than anything she had done in Missouri, but there was a difference so fundamental it changed the nature of the work itself. Here every effort mattered. She cooked and 3 men said thank you. She mended a torn shirt and Slade wore it the next day with a nod of appreciation. She scrubbed the kitchen floor and the whole room brightened. For the first time in her life, Lenora felt the cause and effect of her own existence. She was not invisible here. She was necessary. She won them over one by one, not through charm or beauty or any of the weapons her sisters wielded so effortlessly, through competence, through showing up every morning and doing what needed to be done. Tate was the easiest. The boy attached himself to her like a burr to a wool sock and would not be removed. After breakfast each morning came reading lessons, and his progress was swift enough to surprise even Lenora. He had his father's sharp mind, she realized. It had simply been waiting for someone to feed it. Then she opened the piano. It sat in the parlor against one wall covered in 5 years of dust. Hannah's piano shipped from Denver at great expense. The instrument that had not been touched since the day she died. Lenora lifted the cover almost on impulse and pressed a single key. The note rang out slightly flat from years of disuse, but still sweet, still alive. Tate came running. You can play a little. My grandmother taught me. She sat on the bench and played a simple melody from childhood, her fingers stumbling over notes they had once known by heart. The music filled the empty room like light filling a cellar. Tate climbed up beside her and she showed him how to find middle C, how to press the keys gently instead of banging them. He had his father's long fingers. He would be good at this. They were still playing, Tate experimentally plunking keys while Lenora corrected his finger positions when she felt a presence in the doorway. Not Cordell, not Boone. Slade stood there with his shoulder against the frame, his eyes closed, listening. When she stopped, he opened his eyes. Don't quit on my account. I'm sorry, I should have asked before touching the piano. Hannah hated that piano by the end. Slade's voice was quiet. Said it was too loud in such a small house. But I always liked the sound. Play it, please. This house has been quiet long enough. That evening, after Tate was in bed, Slade found Lenora in the parlor and asked if she would play something else. She played the melody her grandmother used to hum on winter evenings in Missouri, simple and aching and old. Slade sat and listened with an expression of such peace that Lenora wondered when he had last been at rest. "You have an artist's soul," she told him. He reddened. "Don't say that in front of Boone. He'll say I have a girl's soul." "Would he be wrong?" Slade laughed, surprised. "Probably not." And the warmth between them, the ease of it, became one of the first true friendships Lenora had ever known. Winning Cordell was harder. It required a different currency, not warmth or music or conversation, but competence of a kind he recognized and respected. She asked to see the ranch accounts. Cordell looked at her across the kitchen table with something she had not seen before. Not suspicion exactly, but surprise. The kind of surprise that comes when something you thought was decorative turns out to be functional. "You want to see the books? I want to understand our operation. If you want a partner, treat me like one." He opened the ledgers and she bent over them with the quiet intensity that came from years of watching her father manage the farm accounts. Amos Whitfield had taught his daughters basic bookkeeping, believing even girls should understand money, though he had never let Lenora near his actual records. But she had learned by observation. She had always learned by observation. "These feed costs seem high for autumn," she said, pointing to a column of figures. "Are you buying supplemental hay?" Cordell stared at her. "Had a dry summer. Hay crop wasn't what it should have been. And here these entries for supplies from Henderson's store in Red Mesa. The prices are higher than wholesale by almost 20%. Is there no other supplier?" For the first time since she had arrived at Bear Creek, Cordell Callahan looked at Lenora not as a problem he was managing or an obligation he was fulfilling, but as a person with a mind that worked in ways he had not anticipated. "You're good with figures," he said. "My father taught me. He said even daughters should understand money." From that day forward, Cordell began sharing the workings of the ranch with her. Every few days, he spent an hour walking her through cattle operations, market conditions, grazing rotations, the delicate balance of income and expense that kept a homestead afloat. Lenora absorbed it like drought-starved earth absorbs rain. She asked questions that sometimes made him pause and reconsider plans he had already made. "You should sell that south strip to Drummond," she said one afternoon, studying the survey map spread across his desk. "Not the whole parcel, just the narrow piece along the creek that's too rocky for decent grazing. It connects two of his larger sections and gives him water access year-round. He'd pay above market for that kind of strategic value." Cordell went still. "That's not a bad idea. The railroad expansion next year will increase land values across this whole region. Drummond knows that. He'll want to consolidate now while prices are still reasonable. Use the money to improve irrigation on the north section where the grass is better." "When did you become a cattle baron?" Cordell asked, and there was something in his voice she had not heard before. Something warm, something that sounded almost like pride. "When you started treating me like a partner instead of another mouth to feed." The words landed between them honest and sharp, and Cordell held her gaze for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You're right, I did that. I apologize." It was the first time he had apologized for anything. The small admission felt like a door opening an inch, not wide, but enough to let in a little light. Winning Boone seemed impossible, but the mountain had its own timing and cracks appeared where she least expected them. One morning early enough that the light was still gray and the frost still silver on the window panes, Lenora came downstairs to find Boone in the kitchen. He was trying to repair the stovepipe that had come loose in the night wind, and a jagged edge of sheet metal had opened a long cut across his palm. Blood dripped steadily onto the floor she had scrubbed the evening before. She did not ask permission. She went to the medicine cabinet Mrs. Weaver kept stocked, took out clean cloth and carbolic wash, came back and took his hand. "I don't need help," Boone growled. "Your hand is bleeding on my clean floor." She held his hand in both of hers. It was enormous. Her fingers could not reach around his palm. The skin was rough with calluses, layered over calluses, the knuckles scarred from a lifetime of hard work and harder living. She cleaned the wound and wrapped it with the quick, practiced motions of a woman who had been mending things her entire life. While she worked, she was close enough to see the bear scar in detail for the first time. It started at his left shoulder and carved a brutal path down across his ribs, disappearing below his belt line. The tissue was thick and ropey white against his tan skin, and there were other scars too. Smaller ones. On his hands, his forearms, his knuckles. A life written in damage. Bear scar, he said, because he had caught her looking. 3 years ago, Grizzly caught me checking trap lines. Cordell shot it off me. Slade stitched me back together. His voice was flat, matter of fact, like he was describing the weather. Did it hurt? Nearly killed me, 3 months before I could walk again. He looked down at her hands on her small fingers working the bandage. Doesn't it bother you? No. Lenora tied off the bandage and looked up at him. Scars just mean you survived. Boone stared at her. For the first time since they had met on that platform in Red Mesa, there was no hostility in his amber eyes, no anger, no wall, just surprise. And beneath the surprise, something tender and unguarded that he covered up so quickly, she almost missed it. Thank you, he said. 2 words. The first he had spoken to her that were not a criticism or a dismissal. 2 words that cost him something to say and that Lenora received like gold. The first trip to town came on a Saturday in late October. Cordell drove the wagon with Lenora beside him. Boone and Slade rode horses on either side. The image of it, one small woman flanked by 3 enormous men, caused a sensation in Red Mesa that would feed the gossip mill for weeks. That's her, the mail-order bride. Tiny little thing. 3 Callahan men with 1 woman, Lord have mercy. Lenora kept her chin up and her eyes forward. At the Mercantile, Delphine Marsh found them. She was golden-haired and sharp-eyed and beautiful in the way that certain women are beautiful, like a well-polished blade. Her smile could cut glass. Cordell, this must be the new bride. What a surprise to hear you'd married. You've always been so particular. Lenora Callahan, Lenora said, offering her hand with a calm she did not feel. Delphine took it briefly, her blue eyes running over Lenora's plain traveling dress, her simple hair, her lack of jewelry beyond Hannah's loose ring. The assessment was thorough and the verdict was clear. Found wanting. Oh, it must be quite an adjustment, living with 3 men so far from civilization. I live with my husband, his brothers, and his son, Lenora corrected gently, like any family. Behind her from the direction where Boone stood, with his arms folded and his hat pulled low, came a small, unexpected sound. A laugh, brief and rough and barely there but unmistakable. The first time Lenora had ever heard Boone Callahan laugh. Outside the Mercantile, Silas Drummond intercepted them. Tall, well-dressed, with a smile that slid across his face like oil on water. He shook Lenora's hand and held it a beat too long. She pulled it back. My offer on your south section still stands, Callahan. Prime grazing land, top dollar. Not interested, Cordell said, his voice the temperature of creek water in January. Everything has a price, Callahan. Think about it. After Drummond walked away, Lenora asked who he was. Cordell explained. Banker, owned half the businesses in town, had been trying to buy ranch land for years, consolidating it under his control. Then Boone spoke and the words stopped Lenora in her tracks. Don't ever be alone with him. His voice was low and serious and carried no trace of the hostility he usually reserved for her. This was warning, pure and urgent. Why? Because I don't like the way he looks at you. Boone's jaw was tight, like something he wants to own. It was the first time he had said anything that sounded like protection rather than rejection. Lenora filed it away with all the other small contradictions that made up the puzzle of Boone Callahan. The dinner at the Marsh Ranch the following Sunday was exactly the ordeal Lenora had expected. The house was ostentatious, decorated with expensive furniture that looked transplanted from an Eastern parlor. Delphine's mother fussed with false hospitality, while her father talked cattle prices with Cordell. And Delphine spent the entire meal finding ways to remind everyone that she had known Cordell since childhood. Remember the summer dance when we were 16, Cordell? You were so gallant. I don't recall, Cordell said flatly. Then Delphine turned her attention to Lenora, her voice sweet as arsenic. 3 men, 1 woman, so far from town. People do talk, you know. The things they say are not kind. Delphine, her mother murmured, but there was no real reproach in it. I'm only trying to help. Delphine's smile was a masterpiece of controlled malice. She should know what she's gotten herself into. Cordell Callahan is not an easy man to be married to. He's cold, distant, married to that ranch more than he ever was to. That's enough. The words came out of Lenora harder than she intended. Hard enough to silence the table. Hard enough to make Delphine's mother set down her fork. Hard enough to make Cordell turn and look at his wife with an expression she had never seen on his face before. My husband is a good man who works hard to provide for his family. I won't sit here and listen to speculation about my marriage or comparisons to his first wife. Lenore met Delphine's eyes without flinching. And Miss Marsh, if you wanted Cordell, you had 5 years. You didn't try, I did. That is the difference. Dead silence. The kind of silence that fills a room after lightning strikes and before the thunder arrives. Then from the hallway behind the dining room, Boone's voice. He had been listening from the other side of the wall. Well said. 2 words again. But this time they carried weight enough to change the balance of something that had been tilting since the day Lenore arrived. On the ride home, Cordell reached across the wagon seat and took her hand. His calloused fingers wrapped around hers firm and warm, and he did not let go for the entire descent down the mountain road. Thank you, he said, for defending me. You're my family. I protect what's mine. Slade, riding alongside, grinned. I think Delphine Marsh won't be inviting us to dinner again. Even Boone, riding ahead, made a sound that might have been agreement. It was a small moment, a tiny crack in the ice. But small cracks, Lenora was learning, were how mountains eventually broke open. The weeks that followed brought a slow, careful thawing. Cordell stopped disappearing into his study after supper. Instead, he sat in the parlor while Lenora sewed or read, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. He brought a worn book of fairy tales down from the attic one evening and handed it to her. Found this. Thought Tate might like it. It was mine. My mother used to read to me from it. He sat down across from her. She died when I was 8. Fever took her in 3 days. My father never remarried. Just threw himself into building this ranch, worked until he dropped dead of a heart attack at 55. I always swore I wouldn't end up like him. But you did, Lenora said gently. Slade was the one who convinced me to place the advertisement. He said I was turning into our father. Said Tate needed a mother, and the ranch needed a woman, and I needed someone. He paused. Boone said he'd rather die than watch another woman die in this house. The words fell between them like stones into deep water. Hannah died here, Lenora said. Not a question. Giving birth. The midwife couldn't get through. Snow blocked the road. Slade rode all night in the blizzard looking for help and came back with nothing. Cordell's voice was controlled the way a man controls his voice when the alternative is breaking apart. Boone was the one who stayed with her, the last person to hold her hand. Now Lenora understood. Boone did not simply hate the idea of a new woman in this house. He was terrified. He had watched a woman die here, held her hand while she bled out, and the thought of witnessing that again was more than his scarred body and battered heart could bear. I'm not Hannah, Lenora said. No. Cordell agreed. Something moved behind his eyes. You're not. Then November came and brought the storm. Not just any storm, the kind of storm that the old-timers in Red Mesa would talk about for years afterward. The kind that separated the living from the dead and reminded everyone on that mountain that civilization was just a thin line drawn in snow that the wind could erase in an hour. But before the storm, the letter arrived. 3 days before the sky turned the color of old bruises, a mail rider from town made the long climb to Bear Creek with a bundle of correspondence. Letters from Lenora's mother, a supply catalog, and one envelope addressed to Mr. Callahan, Bear Creek Homestead, in handwriting that Lenora recognized with a jolt of pure dread. Odette's handwriting. The letter did not reach Cordell. It reached Boone. Lenora was in the kitchen preparing for the coming weather when Boone walked in, and the look on his face stopped her hands in the bread dough. He set the letter on the table with the careful precision of a man placing a loaded gun. Read it, he said to Cordell, who had just come in from checking the barn. Cordell read. His expression did not change. The wall of control held perfectly, but his hands tightened on the paper until it crumpled at the edges. Slade read over his brother's shoulder. His eyes went wide, then found Lenora's, and in them she saw something that looked like grief. She knew before anyone spoke. The way the blood drained from her face must have confirmed it. Odette, driven by guilt or cruelty or some mixture of both, had written to confess. We sent Lenora as a joke, the letter said. We wrote the letter in her name. We chose the worst photograph. We never imagined anyone would respond. Lenore is innocent in this, but you should know the truth about how this arrangement began. I can explain, Lenore started. Boone's voice cut through the kitchen like a winter wind. Explain what? That you're a joke, that your own family sent you here to humiliate us, that even the people who know you best think you're worthless. Boone, Slade began. No, I said from the beginning. I said, don't trust this. I said there would be trouble. Boone turned to Cordell. And you married her. Put Hannah's ring on her finger. Let your son call her mother. And the whole time she knew she was sent here as a joke. Lenora forced her voice past the tightness in her throat. I did not know what the letter said. I knew my sisters wrote it, but you still came. Knowing it was their joke you got on that train? Because that was the truth. She had known it was a joke. She had come anyway. And there was no argument clever enough to make that fact disappear. Cordell spoke at last. His voice was flat with exhaustion. Everyone out. I need to speak with my wife. Alone. Boone left. The door slammed hard enough to shake the dishes in the cupboard. Slade lingered, looking at Lenora with pain in his eyes, then followed. Cordell and Lenora faced each other in the empty kitchen, while outside the first flakes of what would become the worst storm in 5 years began to fall. Tell me everything, he said, from the beginning. And she did. All of it. The laughter through the window, the daguerreotype where she was squinting, the decision to go because it was the only door that had ever opened for her, the terror of stepping off the train, the shock of seeing 3 men instead of one. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone, she said, her voice shaking but holding. I came because this was the only chance I'd ever had. My sisters wanted to make me a laughingstock. Instead, they gave me something I could never have gotten on my own, a way out of a life where I was nothing. Cordell was quiet for a long time. The letter said you were your father's greatest disappointment, the plain daughter, the one nobody wanted. Yes. I don't care what the letter said. I care what you are. He stood and his shadow fell across her like a door closing. But right now, I don't know what you are. I need time. He walked out. The door closed behind him. Not slammed, closed, quiet and controlled, and somehow worse than any slamming could have been. Lenora stood alone in the kitchen while the blizzard began to howl outside the windows. 3 men had turned their backs. Cordell needed time. Boone wanted her gone. Even Gentle Slade had not stayed to defend her. She had 2 choices. Leave when the storm broke, return to Missouri, accept her fate as the unwanted daughter who could not hold on to even a marriage that had never wanted her in the first place. Or stay. Fight. Prove herself not with words, because words were what had gotten her into this, but with work. With the only currency she had ever been able to spend. Lenora Callahan dried her eyes, rolled up her sleeves, and started cooking. 3 days the storm raged. 3 days of 4 adults and 1 child locked in a house where the tension was thick enough to chew. 3 days of wind that screamed like something LM and snow that buried the world to its waist. And through all 3 days, Lenora did not stop working. She had breakfast ready at dawn, coffee hot at all hours, dinner on the table when the men came in from fighting through snow to check on livestock, their coats crusted white, their faces raw and red. She did not ask them to speak to her. She did not beg or explain or weep. She simply did what needed doing, and she did it well, and she let the doing speak for her. The first day, no one spoke to her except Tate, who could feel the wrongness in the air, but was too young to understand it. Mama Lenora, why is everyone he asked, climbing into her lap with his picture book. Everyone is tired from the storm, sweetheart. The second day, 2 calves were lost in the blizzard. Cordell came in with his jaw clenched and his shoulders carrying the weight of failure. Lenora set a plate of hot stew in front of him without a word. He ate, he looked at her. He did not speak, but he nodded, a small acknowledgement, a crack in the wall. That evening, Slade found her in the kitchen, washing dishes. I'm not angry with you, Lenora. His voice was soft and careful. I understand why you came. If I'd been in your place, I'd have gotten on that train too. She said nothing because her throat was too tight, but she touched his arm briefly and he understood. The third night, the wind began to ease, and Boone came to her door. He filled the doorway the way he filled every space he entered, not just with his eyes but with the force of whatever burned inside him. He leaned against the frame and looked at her where she sat on her narrow bed, a blanket pulled around her shoulders, her grandmother's music box silent in her hands. I don't hate you, Lenora. He used her name, the first time. The sound of it in his rough voice was strange and somehow sacred. I never hated you. She waited. She had learned by now that Boone spoke in his own time or not at all, and pushing only made him retreat. Hannah came from the city, small like you, not used to mountain living. She was miserable here, hated the winters, hated the loneliness, hated that Cordell loved this ranch more than he loved her, and she was right about that. Boone's voice dropped lower. By the end, she barely spoke, just stared out the windows like she was in prison. And then she was pregnant. And then the storm came. And then the midwife couldn't get through. He pressed his palms against his eyes. I was with her when she died. I held her hand. And the last thing she said to me was, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Boone. I still don't know what she was sorry for. For dying, for being unhappy, for not being strong enough to survive this place. The silence that followed was so complete, Lenora could hear the wind easing outside the storm spinning itself against the mountain. I thought anyone who came here would be the same, Boone continued, small and soft and broken by the first real winter. I thought you would hate it here, would suffer the way Hannah suffered. And I couldn't. His voice cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but enough. I couldn't sit beside another bed and hold another hand. I wasn't strong enough for that again. But you're not like her. He looked at her, now really looked, and his amber eyes held none of the hardness she had come to expect. You don't complain. You work. You get up every morning and cook for men who won't speak to you. You bandaged my hand and didn't flinch at the scars. And I've been watching you, Lenora. These 6 weeks, I've been watching, and you are nothing like Hannah. He straightened in the doorway. Stay. That's not an order, it's a request. Then he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs but somehow lighter than before, as though the words he had finally spoken had taken weight from his body that he had been carrying for 5 years. The fourth day dawned clear and cold and blinding white. The storm was over. The world was buried under 4 feet of snow, and the sun turned everything to diamond. Cordell found Lenora in the kitchen doing what she always did, making breakfast, keeping the household alive. I've been thinking, when he said, about the letter, about the joke. She waited, her hands dusted with flour, her heart in her throat. You came here because you needed a way out. I placed that advertisement because I needed a way out. Neither of us lied about what we are. We just both came to this from desperate places. He sat down at the table. The letter your sister wrote was a lie, but you're not a lie. These 6 weeks weren't a lie. The way you've cared for Tate wasn't a lie. No. I suspected the letter was false from the beginning. It was too flowery. Didn't match the truth I saw in your eyes in that photograph. He met her gaze and held it. I chose to believe your eyes. I still do. He reached across the table and took her hand. For the first time, the gesture felt like a choice rather than an obligation. His calloused fingers wrapped around hers and held on. You cooked for us all 3 days, he said. Every meal, even though we gave you nothing but silence. Why? Because it was the work that needed doing, and because I don't prove myself with words. I prove myself with what I do. Cordell looked at her, and for the first time since the night they met, something in his face broke open. Not a dramatic breaking, not tears or confessions or grand gestures, just the faintest softening around his eyes, the slightest relaxation of that iron jaw, a smile that was barely a curve at the corner of his mouth, but that transformed his whole weathered face. You're right, he said. You do. After the blizzard, the ice between them thawed in ways both visible and invisible. Cordell no longer disappeared after supper. He sat in the parlor, sometimes reading, sometimes watching Lenora teach Tate his letters, sometimes just sitting in companionable quiet while the fire burned low. He told her about his childhood, about his father's relentless drive to build Bear Creek into something that would outlast him, about his mother's gentle voice reading fairy tales by lamplight, about the morning he found his father face down in the north pasture, dead at 55, from a heart that had worked as hard as the rest of him and given out first. And one evening, with the fire crackling and snow pressing against the windows and Tate long since asleep upstairs, Cordell told her the truth about Hannah. Everyone thinks I loved her so much I couldn't move on. And I did love her. But by the end, we'd made each other miserable. She wanted society and culture and conversation. I wanted to build this ranch. We were wrong for each other in every way that mattered, and neither of us was brave enough to admit it. He stared into the fire. That last winter, she barely spoke to me. Then she was pregnant. She begged me to take her to Denver for the birth, a real hospital, real doctors. But I thought she was overreacting, thought women had been having babies on ranches since the beginning of time, thought the midwife would be enough. His voice cracked, just barely, a fissure in stone. I was wrong, and she died for it. And the worst part, the part I have never told anyone, is that when she died, I felt guilty, but I also felt free. What kind of man feels free when his wife dies? A human one, Lenora said softly. She took his hand and held it the way she had held it that first morning at the breakfast table, firmly, without judgment. A man trapped in an unhappy marriage. Feeling relief doesn't mean you didn't love her, it just means you're human. Cordell looked at her in the firelight, and something passed between them that needed no words. An understanding, a recognition. Two damaged people seeing each other's scars and choosing not to look away. I've been punishing myself for 5 years, he said, refusing to let anyone close. Building walls. And then you showed up, honest and plain and trying so hard to be useful. And you got past the walls, Lenora. I don't know how, but you did. He drew her close, not with passion, not with urgency, with something rarer and more honest. The way a man holds something he has realized is precious only after nearly losing it. And Lenora let herself be held, feeling the steady hammer of his heart through his shirt, breathing in the smell of wood smoke and leather and coffee. That was simply Cordell. That night he asked her to share his room, not with pressure, not with expectation, with a simple quiet statement that he did not want walls between them anymore. Lenora looked at this man who had said he was not romantic, who had offered her only honesty and work and a life that asked everything, and said yes. The door to their room closed softly behind them. When morning came, everything had changed between them. Everything that mattered had been said without words in the language of trust and tenderness, and Lenora woke with Cordell's arm heavy and warm across her shoulders and the first real certainty she had known since boarding that westbound train. She belonged here. In the weeks that followed, Boone's transformation was not spoken aloud. It was demonstrated. Firewood appeared beside the kitchen stove before Lenora was awake, split and stacked with military precision. The water bucket was full every morning. A new shelf materialized in the bedroom, built with the same careful joinery that Slade used in his carvings, but rougher, more practical, unmistakably Boone's work. He never mentioned any of it. One morning, a bunch of wild, dried flowers appeared on the kitchen table. No note, no explanation. Slade saw them and his eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Flowers, Boone picked flowers. From the doorway, Boone growled, "Shut up." But his ears were red. The negotiation with Drummond came in early December. Lenora rode into Red Mesa with Cordell, her research notes tucked into a leather folder that Slade had made for her. Boone and Slade waited outside the bank, a wall of muscle and warning that Drummond could see through his office window. Drummond opened with a lowball offer. Cordell started to counter, but Lenora put her hand on his arm. "Mr. Drummond," she said pleasantly, "that strip of land connects your two largest parcels and gives you year-round water access. It's worth at least double what you're offering. And with the railroad expansion coming through next year, land values in this region are going to climb significantly. We can negotiate a fair price today, or we can wait and see what other buyers might offer once the route is announced." Drummond stared at her. The oily smile faltered. He named a new figure. They haggled. Lenora held firm, citing numbers and comparisons and market projections with a calm precision that left Drummond no room to condescend or dismiss. They left his office with a bank draft that exceeded Cordell's most optimistic expectations. On the sidewalk, Cordell kissed her, right there in front of Guam and Red Mesa and anyone who cared to watch. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you? Not since this morning. I love you. You're brilliant and fair, and you make me better than I am alone." Boone was leaning against the hitching post, arms folded, watching them with an expression that was no longer hostile, but was not quite anything else either. As Lenora passed him on the way to the wagon, he spoke quietly. I don't like the way Drummond looked at you. What way? Like something he wants to own. The 6 words hung in the cold December air between them, heavy with a warning that Lenora tucked away in the place where she kept all the things she was still learning about this wild, beautiful, dangerous country and the men who lived in it. She climbed into the wagon beside her husband. Boone and Slade mounted their horses, and the 4 of them headed back up the mountain toward Bear Creek, toward home, while behind them the town of Red Mesa hummed with gossip about the mail-order bride who had walked into Silas Drummond's office and walked out with his money. The plain daughter from Missouri was becoming someone else entirely. Not because her face had changed, but because she had finally found a place where what she could do mattered more than what she looked like. And in the doing and the daily work of building a life from honesty and effort and stubborn refusal to be defeated, Lenora Callahan was discovering that she had been strong all along. She had simply never been given the chance to prove it. Until now. Part 3, The Reckoning and the Homecoming. Christmas came to Bear Creek on a blanket of fresh snow that turned the valley into a world made entirely of white and silence. For the first time in 5 years, the house wore decoration. Lenora and Tate had spent 3 days cutting paper snowflakes and stringing garlands of dried pine boughs, hanging them from every beam and rafter until the whole place smelled like a forest cathedral. A small pine tree stood in the parlor corner, trimmed with ribbon scraps and the tin stars that Slade had cut and hammered in his workshop. The boy was beside himself with excitement. He had never known a Christmas with a woman in the house, and the difference was visible in everything from the holly wreath on the door to the gingerbread men cooling on the kitchen counter to the stockings that Lenore had sewn from flour sack fabric and hung from the mantel. 4 stockings, one for each brother and one for Tate. She had embroidered their initials by lamplight while Cordell slept beside her, his breathing deep and steady, his arm across her waist. Christmas Eve supper was the largest meal Bear Creek had seen in years. Cordell sat at the head of the table, Lenore at the foot, Slade and Boone on either side, with Tate wedged between Boone and a stack of pillows to bring him level with the tabletop. Judson Cooper, their ranch hand, joined them, scrubbed clean for the occasion and wearing a shirt that still had its collar buttons. Mrs. Weaver sat with her hands folded and her eyes suspiciously bright. It was the first time the table had been full. The first time the house had felt crowded in the way that good houses should feel crowded, not with bodies but with warmth, with noise, with the particular electricity that comes from people who have chosen to be a family, even though blood did not require it. Gifts were exchanged with the awkward tenderness of people unused to giving. Slade had carved a set of wooden horses for Tate, each one different, each one detailed down to the individual tail hairs. The boy shrieked with joy and immediately began racing them across the table through the gravy. Judson presented a folding knife. Mrs. Weaver had knitted a scarf so long it could have wrapped around the boy 3 times. Boone set a small leather pouch in front of Tate without ceremony. Inside was a polished river stone, flat and smooth with a vein of quartz running through it like a bolt of frozen lightning. "Found it in the creek last spring," Boone said gruffly. "Thought you might like it." "It's the best rock in the whole world," Tate declared, and threw his arms around Boone's neck with the fearless affection of a child who did not know he was hugging a man made of scar tissue and barbed wire. Boone went rigid for a moment. Then his massive hand came up and rested on the boy's back, gentle as snowfall. Lenora had knitted scarves for every man at the table and baked enough cookies to supply a small army. For Tate, she had sewn a stuffed bear from scraps of brown wool and embroidered a new shirt with his initials. For Slade, a leather cover for his carving tools stitched by hand. For Boone, a pair of heavy wool socks because she had noticed his old ones were more whole than sock, and he would never buy new ones for himself. For Cordell, she had spent weeks working on something that made her hands ache and her eyes burn from close stitching by lamplight. A quilt, pieced together from fabric that told the story of their first months together. Blue from her traveling dress, brown from one of his worn-out work shirts, red from a flannel shirt of Tate's that the boy had outgrown, calico from the kitchen curtains she had sewn in October. In the center, she had embroidered the ranch brand and the date of their wedding in careful even stitches. Cordell opened the wrapping and his hands went still. He stared at the quilt for a long time without speaking. The room went quiet. Even Tate stopped racing his wooden horses. Cordell ran his rough fingers over the stitching, over the pieces of their life sewn together into something whole, and when he looked up at Lenora, his eyes were wet. "You gave me a home," she said simply. "I wanted to give you something that showed how much that means." He stood and crossed the room and pulled her into his arms in front of everyone. Not the careful, measured embrace of their early days. This was fierce and unguarded and full of a feeling that he had spent 5 years refusing to name. "I love you," he said against her hair. "God help me, I love you." Tate cheered. Slade looked away and pressed his knuckle against his eye. Mrs. Weaver produced a handkerchief and applied it vigorously to her face. Judson studied his plate with intense concentration. Boone stood quietly and walked out to the porch. Lenora saw him through the window, standing in the snow, his face tilted toward the sky, his breath making clouds in the cold air. He was not angry. He was not grieving. He was standing in the way a man stands when a weight he has been carrying for a long time has finally begun to shift. Cordell's gift to her was a journal bound in tooled leather with her name pressed into the cover in gold. Inside the front flap in his bold handwriting, "For Lenora Callahan, who made our house a home and my life complete. Write our story so we never forget how blessed we are." Later that evening, after Tate had collapsed into sugar-fueled sleep and Mrs. Weaver and Judson had gone home, Cordell told her about the letter. "I wrote to your sisters," he said, "last week." Lenora sat up. "You what?" "I told them the woman they mocked has more courage, kindness, and beauty than anyone I've ever known. I thank them for sending me my wife." His mouth curved. "I may have been less polite than that." "Cordell, what did you say?" "I told them they were fools who couldn't recognize treasure when it was right in front of them, that their cruelty had brought me the greatest gift of my life, and I hoped someday they'd be wise enough to regret what they'd done." He shrugged his broad shoulders. "I also mentioned that you've proven to be a better business mind than most men I know, and that you negotiated circles around the shrewdest banker in the territory." Lenora stared at him. Then she started laughing, then crying. Then both at once, Boone's voice came from the hallway where he had apparently been listening. "You were too polite." "Nobody asked you," Cordell said. "Should have let me add a few lines." "Absolutely not. Just a few." No Boone. But all three of them were smiling, and the sound of laughter in the house on the mountain was the best Christmas music any of them had ever heard. January brought cold that cracked the air like glass and turned breath to ice before it left the body. The ranch settled into its winter rhythm. Shorter days, longer nights, the constant work of keeping livestock alive, and fed and watered when the temperature dropped low enough to freeze a man's eyebrows to his face. And January brought Drummond. He did not come to Bear Creek himself. He was too clever for that. Instead, he began a campaign of quiet destruction that revealed itself in small, accumulating damages. First, the rumors, whispers that spread through Red Mesa like smoke under a closed door. The mail-order bride was a joke. Her own family had sent her as a prank. 3 men living with 1 woman up on that mountain. What kind of arrangement was that really? The things people said were ugly and inventive and designed to isolate the Callahans from the community they depended on for trade and supplies. Then the economic pressure. Drummond called in loans from neighboring ranches, tightening the financial screws on families who had been operating on thin margins for years. The message was subtle but clear. The Callahans' friends were being squeezed, and the squeeze would continue until Bear Creek changed hands. Then in late January, the fire. Lenora woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of Boone's voice roaring from the yard. She ran to the window and saw the orange glow against the snow. The hay storage, a third of their winter feed supply going up in flames that turned the night sky the color of sunset. All 3 brothers and Judson fought the fire for hours. Lenora hauled water and beat at embers with wet blankets and choked on smoke until her lungs burned. Tate watched from the upstairs window with his face pressed against the glass and his wooden horses clutched in both hands. By dawn, the fire was out. They saved most of the hay but lost enough to make the rest of winter precarious. The men stood in the ash and snow, their faces black with soot, their eyes red, their shoulders carrying the particular weariness that comes from fighting a battle, was started by someone else. "Drummond," Boone said. "One word, flat and certain." "Can't prove it," Cordell replied. "Don't need to prove it, need to end it." But ending Drummond required more than anger. It required evidence. And evidence required the kind of careful, patient work that neither Boone's fists nor Cordell's stoic endurance could provide. It required Lenora. She began her research in February during the long, dark evenings when the wind howled outside and the men sat by the fire mending tack and sharpening tools. She wrote letters to the county courthouse requesting copies of land transaction records. She talked to Mrs. Weaver, who knew the history of every property sale in the region for the past 30 years. She spoke quietly with neighboring ranchers' wives when they met at the church socials that Pastor Aldrich organized to keep the winter isolation from driving people mad. Piece by piece, she assembled the puzzle. Drummond's lending practices were predatory. He offered loans to struggling homesteaders with terms buried in language so dense that most of them, men and women who had spent their lives working land rather than reading contracts, did not understand what they were signing. When payments were missed, Drummond exercised clauses that transferred land rights to him at a fraction of their value. 4 families in the Red Mesa district had lost their properties this way. None of them had realized they'd been cheated until it was too late. But there was more. Lenora discovered that Drummond had not paid the full property taxes on several parcels he claimed to own. The paperwork was sloppy, the filings incomplete, the chain of title questionable. For a man who presented himself as the pillar of the community, his legal foundations were built on sand. "This won't hold up in a court of law," Cordell said when she showed him her findings. "We need more." "We don't need a court," Lenora replied. "We need the community. Drummond's power comes from people trusting him. If that trust breaks, his power breaks with it." She spent another month preparing. Cordell helped her understand the land laws. Slade drew detailed maps showing the disputed parcels. And Boone, who hated Drummond with a fury that predated Lenora's arrival by years, did something nobody expected. He went to the neighboring ranches himself, talked to the men who had lost their land, heard their stories, gathered their willingness to stand up and speak. "Since when does Boone talk to people voluntarily?" Slade asked, genuinely astonished. "Since someone showed him that talking can be a weapon too," Cordell said, and looked at Lenora. The confrontation came at the spring town meeting in early April, the annual gathering where the Red Mesa community discussed shared concerns, elected minor officials, and settled disputes. It was held in the meeting hall behind the church, a plain wooden building that smelled of lamp oil and sawdust. And on this particular April afternoon, it was packed to the walls. Drummond sat in the front row. His legs crossed, his hands folded, his oiled smile firmly in place. He had no idea what was coming. Lenora asked to speak. Sheriff Morrison, a neutral man who had held his office for 12 years by staying out of other people's business, gave her the floor. She stood, 5 feet 3 inches of calico dress and braided honey-colored hair and steady blue eyes. The smallest person in a room full of cattlemen and miners and frontier wives who could shoe a horse and shoot a rifle and deliver a calf by lantern light. She looked like she could blow away in a stiff wind. She did not blow away. "I want to talk about land," she said. Her voice was clear and calm and carried to every corner of the room. "Specifically, I want to talk about how several families in this district have lost their land through lending agreements they did not fully understand." She laid her documents on the table in front of Sheriff Morrison. Copies of loan agreements with the predatory clauses highlighted. Copies of county records showing incomplete tax filings. Copies of original deeds compared to the transfer documents that showed discrepancies in dates and signatures. "The Henderson family lost their 80 acres in 1872, she said. "The Pritchard family lost 120 acres in 1873. "The Dawson family and the McGraw family lost their homesteads last year. In each case, the lending terms included clauses that allowed the lender to seize the property for a single missed payment, regardless of previous payments made. In each case, the lender was Silas Drummond." The room went very still. Tom Henderson, a weathered man in his 60s who had been sitting in the back row with his hat in his hands, stood up slowly. "She's right. I signed papers I didn't understand. By the time I realized what I'd agreed to, my land was gone. I was too ashamed to tell anyone." Agnes Pritchard stood next, then Will Dawson, then Ruth McGraw. 4 families, 4 voices that had been silenced by shame and confusion now speaking because a small woman from Missouri had taken the time to listen to them. Drummond rose from his seat. His face had gone the color of raw beef. "This is absurd. The word of a mail-order bride, a joke sent by her own family against a respected citizen of this community." The room held its breath. Lenora did not flinch. "I may have been sent here as a joke, Mr. Drummond. That is the truth, and I have never denied it. My sisters thought it would be amusing to send the plain daughter to 3 mountain men and see what happened. She paused. What happened is that I found a home, I found a family, and I found records that show you have been stealing land from your neighbors through contracts designed to deceive. She turned to face the room. These documents are public record. Anyone can verify them at the county courthouse. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to look at the evidence and decide for yourselves whether you want a man who does business this way to continue holding power over this community. The murmur that went through the room was like wind through tall grass. Heads turned. People looked at Drummond, then at the families who had stood to confirm Lenora's claims, then at each other. The calculus of small-town loyalty was shifting in real time, and Drummond could see it happening. Sheriff Morrison examined the documents with the careful thoroughness of a man who knew he was going to have to make a decision that would define his legacy. After several long minutes, he looked up. These are serious allegations. I'm opening a formal investigation. Mr. Drummond, I'd recommend you make yourself available for questions. Drummond looked around the room one final time. The faces that had always smiled at him, deferred to him, owed him, were now closed and hard and turned away. The banker who had controlled Red Mesa through money and fear, and the careful exploitation of trust, saw all of it crumbling in the space of 20 minutes, dismantled not by force or wealth or political power, but by a woman with a stack of papers and the courage to stand up in a room full of strangers and speak the truth. He left without another word. The door banged shut behind him. But cornered men are dangerous men, and Drummond was not finished. 2 days later, the Callahans were loading supplies into their wagon outside Henderson's Mercantile when Drummond appeared on the boardwalk. He was not alone. 2 men flanked him, hired hands with hard faces and the kind of deliberate stillness that meant they were being paid to cause trouble. Callahan. Drummond's voice had lost its oily smoothness. What was left underneath was thin and mean and desperate. Your wife has made a serious mistake. Cordell set down the sack of flour he was holding. My wife told the truth. If that's a mistake, it's one I'm proud of. The truth. Drummond laughed, but there was no humor in it. The truth is that your mail-order bride has destroyed a reputation I spent 20 years building. And for what? To impress a husband who had to advertise in a newspaper because no real woman would have him. The air between them went tight as a drum skin. Walk away, Drummond, Cordell said quietly. Or what? You'll have your scarred brother beat me. That's all you Callahans know, isn't it? Brute force and stubbornness. One of Drummond's men shifted his weight. His hand moved toward his belt in a gesture that was too deliberate to be casual. Boone stepped forward. He did not step forward the way most men step forward, with hesitation or calculation or concern for what might happen next. He stepped forward the way an avalanche steps forward, the way a grizzly steps forward, with the absolute terrifying certainty of something that has decided to move and will not be stopped by anything short of God or geology. He put himself between Lenora and the 2 hired men. His chest was a wall, his scarred shoulder the one that had survived the bear and the barbed wire and the years of punishment he had inflicted on himself, faced Drummond's men like a shield. Touch her, Boone said, his voice so low it was almost subterranean, and I will take you apart. What happened next was fast and ugly and over in seconds. The closer of Drummond's men lunged, not at Boone, at Lenora, a grab, a shove, an attempt to reach past the wall of muscle that stood between them. Boone caught the man's arm and twisted, and there was a sound like a green branch snapping. The second man came in from the side. The scuffle was brief and brutal. Cordell and Judson piled in. Slade pulled Lenora back, shielding her with his body. By the time Sheriff Morrison came running from across the street, both of Drummond's hired men were on the ground, and Boone was leaning against the wagon with his hand pressed to his left shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. The old bear scar had torn open, not from a bullet or a blade, but from the impact of being slammed sideways into the iron edge of the wagon during the struggle. The wound was ugly, a ragged tear that reopened tissue already weakened by old damage, and it bled with the enthusiasm of a thing that had been waiting 5 years for a reason to let go. Morrison arrested Drummond and his men on the spot. The banker's protests echoed down the main street of Red Mesa as he was marched toward the jail, but nobody came to his defense. Nobody spoke up for him. The town had made its judgment, and Silas Drummond had been found wanting. Lenora knelt beside Boone on the boardwalk. His face was white beneath his tan, and his jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping, but his eyes were clear and focused and fixed on her. "You all right?" he asked. "Me. You're the one bleeding and all over the sidewalk." "Just a scratch." Asked the grizzly bear about real scratches. He tried to grin, and it came out as a grimace. "Are you hurt?" "No, because of you." Lenora pressed a clean cloth against his shoulder, feeling the hot pulse of blood beneath her fingers. "Why did you do that? Why did you step in front of me?" Boone looked up at her from where he sat, this enormous, scarred, broken mending man who had wanted to send her away the day she arrived and who had just put his body between her and harm without a second's hesitation. "Because you're family," he said, "and Callahans protect family. That's all there is to it." Doc Sullivan. Red Mesa's physician stitched Boone's shoulder in the back of his office while Boone gripped the arms of the chair and said nothing. The doctor, a lean man with steady hands and a dry wit, surveyed the damage with professional detachment. "Third time something's had a go at this shoulder," he observed. "Bare barbed wire and now a wagon wheel. You might consider protecting your other side for a change." "I'll take it under advisement," Boone said through his teeth. The ride home was quiet. Boone sat in the wagon bed propped against the sideboards, his arm in a sling, his face the color of old plaster. Lenora sat beside him, not because he needed watching, but because she wanted to be there. Because sitting beside a man who had bled for her seemed like the least she could do. Cordell drove. Slade rode alongside. Tate had been left with Mrs. Weaver, and the absence of his constant chatter made the silence feel larger than it was. "You were reckless," Cordell said without turning around. "I was effective," Boone replied. "You could have been killed." "Could have. Wasn't. That's not the point." "That's exactly the point, brother. I'm alive. She's alive by him, and Drummond is in a cell. I call that a successful Tuesday." Slade from horseback shook his head. "He's impossible." "I've always been impossible," Boone agreed. "You just didn't appreciate it before." Boone's recovery took 2 weeks, most of which he spent in his room being the worst patient in the history of medicine. He tried to get up the first day and nearly passed out. He tried to dress himself the second day and tore the stitches. By the third day, he had surrendered to horizontal life, but the surrender did not come quietly. Lenora brought him meals and changed his bandages and read to him from the book of fairy tales that had been Cordell's as a boy. Boone protested this arrangement with vigor. "I'm not a child." "Then stop acting like one and let me change your bandage." "I can do it myself." "With one hand while lying down, show me." He could not, and they both knew it, in the small domestic battle that played out twice a day when she came to tend his wound became a kind of ritual. He complained. She ignored the complaints. He grudgingly submitted. She worked with gentle, efficient hands. And in the quiet moments between the arguing and the bandaging, something healed that had nothing to do with his shoulder. "I'm sorry," Boone said one afternoon, staring at the ceiling while she wound fresh cloth around the wound. "For everything. The way I treated you when you first came. The things I said, telling you to go back. You deserve better." "You were forgiven a long time ago, Boone." "Why?" "Because I understood why. You weren't angry at me. You were angry at the idea that life could go on without Hannah. Angry that someone could take her place." "Nobody took her place." He turned his head to look at her. "You didn't replace Hannah. You built something new, something different, something she could never have built because she didn't have what you have." "What's that grit?" The word was blunt and unadorned, the highest compliment Boone Callahan knew how to pay. "You've got grit, Lenora, the real kind, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself." Tate visited every day, bringing toys and endless questions and the uncomplicated devotion that was his gift to everyone in the household. "Uncle Boone, Mama Lenora says you got hurt saving her. She says you're a hero." Boone's jaw worked. "I'm not a hero, boy." "Mama Lenora says you are." "Mama Lenora talks too much." But his eyes were bright, and when Tate climbed onto the bed and curled against his uninjured side like a puppy, seeking warmth, Boone did not push him away. He put his good arm around the boy and held him there, and Lenora watched from the doorway as something that had been locked inside Boone Callahan for 5 years finally quietly broke free. Spring unfurled across the valley in shades of green that Lenora had never seen in Missouri. The snow retreated up the mountainside like a tide going out, revealing wildflowers in its wake. Bear Creek swelled with snowmelt and sang through the valley with a voice that sounded like joy. Calves were born, fences were mended, the world turned, and life went on. Letters came from Missouri. Lenora's mother wrote regularly, now asking about ranch life with genuine interest and an eagerness that spoke of a woman who had finally awakened to the daughter she had overlooked. Her father's letter was stiff and formal, as expected, but included one sentence that made Lenora's throat tight. "I am pleased to hear you have found your place in the world." Her sisters wrote as well. A joint letter that began with apologies and ended with curiosity about the West. Odette had become engaged to a banker's son. Cecily was being courted by 3 different men and could not decide among them. Wren asked if there were any eligible ranchers in Wyoming, as she was dreadfully bored with Missouri society. "Your sisters want to visit this summer," Cordell observed, reading over her shoulder. "Would you mind? It's your home too, Lenora. Invite whoever you want." He paused. "Though I admit I'm curious to meet the women who were foolish enough to think they were better than you." Boone, recovered enough to be back at work, though still favoring his shoulder, offered his own opinion. "Invite them. Let them see what their joke created." They arrived in June when the valley was at its most magnificent. 3 Whitfield sisters in their eastern finery, bouncing up the mountain road in a hired wagon, gripping the sideboards with white-knuckled hands every time the wheels slipped on loose stone. When the wagon stopped in front of Bear Creek Homestead, the 3 Callahan brothers were coming out of the barn. Cecily saw them first. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Good Lord," she whispered. "There are 3 of them, and they're all—" "Cecily, compose yourself," Odette hissed, though her own composure was visibly strained. Wren simply stared, her cheeks the color of wild roses. Cordell approached with his usual measured courtesy. "Welcome to Bear Creek." He did not smile. Boone stood behind him, arms folded, scar visible, his entire 6'7" frame radiating a very specific message directed at the 3 women who had tried to destroy his sister through marriage. The message did not require words. Slade was the one who broke the tension, as he always did. "So these are the famous sisters. We've heard a great deal about you." Odette flinched. Then Lenora appeared on the porch, and the world shifted. She stood with her hand on the rail, the mountain sun warm on her face, her honey hair braided neatly, her blue eyes bright, her posture straight and sure. 6 months of mountain air and honest labor, and being loved by a good man had changed her in ways that went deeper than skin. She was still small, still plain by the standards her sisters used to measure beauty, but there was a steadiness to her now, a groundedness that made the word plain feel like the wrong word entirely. And she was pregnant. 6 months along her belly, round beneath her cotton dress, carrying the visible proof that this life she had built was not just surviving, but growing. "Hello, sisters," she said. The visit lasted 2 weeks, and it changed all of them. Odette wept when she apologized. Real tears, not the theatrical kind she had perfected over years of social manipulation. "I'm sorry," she said, sitting on the porch at sunset with Lenora, watching the mountains turn purple against the evening sky. "For the joke, for all the years, for being too blind to see what was in front of us." "You gave me this life," Lenora said. "You should not have been cruel. But without the cruelty, I would not be here." "That doesn't excuse it." "No, but it transforms it. The worst thing you ever did to me became the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't know what to call that except grace." Cecily had her own reckoning. She admitted what Lenora had always suspected but never heard spoken aloud. "I was jealous of your relationship with grandmother, of the way you could sit still and read while the rest of us needed constant attention. I thought being loud and pretty was the same as being strong. You proved me wrong." Wren, the youngest, the follower, the one who had gone along because she did not know how to stand alone, simply held Lenora and cried without words. Sometimes no words were needed. There was one unexpected moment that Lenora would remember long after her sisters had gone. An evening when she looked out the kitchen window and saw Boone teaching Odette to split firewood. His patience was extraordinary, his low voice guiding her through each swing of the axe, his huge hands adjusting her grip with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man his size. Odette laughed when the wood finally split clean, a sound of pure and calculated delight, and Boone, watching her, allowed himself a smile that he probably did not know was visible. Lenora thought there was hope for Boone yet. when he is ready, when his scars have healed enough to let someone touch them. The sisters left at the end of June, and the farewell was different from any they had known. No mockery, no condescension. Just four women who had finally seen each other clearly standing in the mountain sunlight, holding hands. "Come back," Lenora said. "We will," Odette promised. And for the first time, Lenora believed her. Summer ripened into autumn, and Lenora's body grew round with new life. The pregnancy progressed without complication, but the shadow of Hannah's death hung over the household like a cloud that no amount of sunshine could entirely dispel. Cordell made arrangements with military precision. They would go to Denver. They would stay in a hotel near the hospital. He would hire two doctors because one was not enough, because nothing was enough when the woman you loved was doing the thing that had killed the woman before her. "It's expensive," Lenora said. "You are more important than money, more important than this ranch, more important than anything." His hands were on her shoulders, his whiskey-colored eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that brooked no argument. "I lost Hannah because I was too proud and too cheap to take her somewhere safe. I will not make that mistake again. Not with you. Not ever." Boone's response when he heard the plan was delivered in his characteristic style. Brief, absolute, non-negotiable. "I'm coming to Denver." "You don't have to," Lenore said. "I sat in this house last time. I sat here and waited, and she died. I'm not sitting here again. I'm going, and I'm staying outside that hospital door, and if a single thing goes wrong, I will carry the doctor in myself." Slade simply said, "We all go. Judson can hold the ranch." And so in late August, as the Aspens were just beginning to think about turning gold, the entire Callahan family made the journey to Denver. Three enormous men and one small pregnant woman in a hotel room that felt crowded even before anyone unpacked. Cordell hired two doctors. He also hired a nurse. He inspected the hospital himself, walking every corridor, checking every room, asking questions until the hospital director began to wonder if the man was planning to buy the building. Slade brought flowers for Lenora's room. "So it looks less like a hospital and more like somewhere a person would actually want to be." Boone positioned himself in the corridor outside the maternity ward and did not move. For 3 days before labor began, he sat in a wooden chair with his back against the wall and his arms folded and his hat pulled over his eyes, and the hospital staff learned very quickly not to ask him to relocate. Labor came on a September evening, exactly 1 year after the day Lenora had stepped off a train in Red Mesa and seen three strangers waiting on a platform. The symmetry was not lost on her as the contractions began and the world narrowed to pain and breathing, and the fierce determination to survive what Hannah had not. The three Callahan brothers paced the corridor like caged animals. Cordell walked back and forth with his hands behind his back, his face carved from granite. Slade sat with his elbows on his knees and his head bowed, his lips moving in what might have been prayer. Boone stood against the wall with his fists clenched, staring at the closed door as though he could keep death on the other side of it through sheer force of will. The night was long, the longest any of them had ever known. And then dawn came. Pale light crept through the hospital windows, and with it came a sound that erased 5 years of grief and fear and guilt. The thin, furious, glorious cry of a newborn child. The doctor opened the door. "Mother and daughter are both healthy. Congratulations, Mr. Callahan." Cordell was through the door before the doctor finished speaking. Slade was right behind him. Boone came last, moving slowly as though he was afraid of what he might find on the other side. Lenora lay propped against pillows, exhausted and radiant and alive. In her arms, wrapped in a white blanket, was a tiny red-faced creature with a surprising amount of dark hair and a set of lungs that could fill a cathedral. Cordell stood beside the bed and looked at his wife and daughter, and his face did something that Lenora had only seen once before on Christmas night when he opened the quilt. It broke open. Not with grief this time, but with a squeeze so large it could not be contained by any wall he had ever built. "She's perfect," he breathed. "You're perfect. You did it, Lenora." "We did it," she corrected. "Together." They named her Hannah Grace. Hannah for the mother that Tate would never remember, because that name deserved to live on in something joyful rather than something sorrowful. Grace for the grace that had brought a plain girl from Missouri to a mountain in Wyoming and given her everything she had never dared to hope for. Boone stood at the window looking at the baby in Lenora's arms. His massive frame was very still. His scarred hands hung at his sides. "She looks like her mother," he said quietly. Then he looked at Lenora, and something in his amber eyes completed a journey that had begun the day she stepped off that train. A journey from hostility to tolerance to respect to protection to something that could only be called love, though he would never use that word. Not the kind of love that Cordell had given her, romantic and deep and hard won. A different kind. The kind that a man who has been broken by loss feels when he realizes that the world has given him something worth defending again. "No," Boone said. "She looks like Lenora. She's beautiful." 3 weeks later, they brought Hannah Grace home to Bear Creek. Tate met them at the porch, vibrating with excitement. He had been counting the days on a chart that Mrs. Weaver had helped him make, crossing off each morning with increasing impatience. "The baby. Where's the baby? I'm going to be the best big brother in all of Wyoming, in the whole world." He peered into the blanket bundle in Lenora's arms and saw his sister's face. Tiny, wrinkled, sleeping. "She's little," he said, his voice hushed with wonder. "Littler than a barn kitten." "You were that little once," Cordell told him. "No way." Tate leaned in and kissed his sister's forehead with a carefulness that stopped every adult heart in the vicinity. "Hello, baby. I'm Tate. I'm your brother. I'm going to teach you to ride horses when you're bigger." That evening, with Hannah Grace sleeping in the cradle that Slade had spent months carving by hand, every spindle turned with love, every surface sanded so smooth that not a single splinter could find a baby's skin, and with Tate asleep in his room, after the longest and most exciting day of his young life, Cordell and Lenora stood at their bedroom window. Moonlight silvered the valley. The mountains stood black against the sky thick with stars. Bear Creek caught the moon and carried it downstream in fragments of light. The cattle were dark shapes on the silver grass. The barn was a solid shadow. The pines whispered their endless conversation with the wind. "Thank you," Cordell said, "for being brave enough to get on that train, for giving me a second chance at everything, at love, at family, at being the man my father should have been. Thank you for seeing me." Lenora leaned into him, feeling his heartbeat steady against her back. "My whole life nobody saw me. Then you opened a letter with the worst photograph ever taken, and somehow you saw what nobody else could." "I saw truth," he said, tired, sad, honest eyes that had stopped pretending. "I didn't need beauty. I needed someone real." "You saw that from a photograph." "I saw that from the eyes. Slade saw it too. That's why he pushed for the advertisement in the first place. And Boone," Cordell paused, "Boone saw it before any of us. He just wasn't ready to admit it." Below them in the parlor, the piano sounded. Slade was playing the melody that Lenora had taught him, the one her grandmother used to hum on winter nights in Missouri. The notes drifted up through the floorboards and out through the open window and into the mountain air, carrying with them everything that words could not hold. On the porch, Boone sat in the rocking chair that Slade had built, listening to the music, looking at the stars. The yellow dog lay at his feet. His scarred hands rested on his knees. His face for once was at peace. The house on the mountain that had been silent for 5 years was full of sound again, full of life, full of the particular kind of beauty that cannot be seen with the eyes but can only be felt with the heart. Lenora had been sent west as a joke. She had arrived as the family disappointment, the plain daughter nobody wanted. But she had become something far more important than beautiful. She had become essential. She had become the center around which 3 broken men and 2 small children orbited like planets around a steady, warm, enduring sun. She had been told all her life that she was not enough, that her face was too plain, her hair too mousy, her figure too slight, her presence too forgettable. She had believed it for 24 years. She did not believe it anymore, because Cordell Callahan had looked at a squinting photograph and seen courage, because Slade Callahan had heard her play piano and found peace, because Boone Callahan had tried to send her away and ended up bleeding for her on a boardwalk in Red Mesa, because a 4-year-old boy had taken her hand and called her mama and meant it with his whole enormous heart. Beauty, Lenora understood now, was not something you were born with. It was something you became when you stopped hiding and started living, when you stopped apologizing and started belonging, when you opened yourself to love and let someone love you back exactly as you were. The music box sat on the bedroom dresser, silent now, its melody replaced by the living music of a piano played with feeling, and a baby's soft breathing, and the mountain wind, and the creek, and the wolves calling to each other in the darkness beyond the valley. But sometimes on quiet evenings, Lenora still wound the key and let her grandmother's song fill the room, a bridge between the girl she had been and the woman she had become. Between the life she left behind and the life she built with her own two hands in the wild, beautiful, unforgiving country that had finally taught her what she was worth. She was enough. She had always been enough. She would always be enough. And on a ranch called Bear Creek, in a valley ringed by mountains, in a house built by stubborn men and held together by an ordinary woman who turned out to be extraordinary, that truth was known. It was lived. It was celebrated in every meal she cooked, every wound she bandaged, every lesson she taught, every ledger she balanced, every song she played, every morning she rose before dawn to start the coffee and keep the world turning. The cruel joke had become the greatest love story the Wind River Range had ever known. And the plain daughter, the one they sent away laughing, was the most beautiful woman on the mountain. Not because her face had changed, because someone had finally looked at her and seen everything.